All right, welcome to the Golf Coach Podcast. Alex, how you going, man?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Mate, I appreciate you coming on again. I often talk a little bit online, and I thought to myself, you know what? I use this opportunity to kind of catch up with some friends and have a good chat. And I'm always intrigued by the stuff that you share, and I think we share, a similar passion and some really similar ideas about how we like to see the golf swing swung and live our life by as well. So, really appreciate you coming on, mate.
Yeah, of course.
Hey, have you done an ice bath today?
I did actually. Yeah, I did.
How cold was it?
I was like in the low 40s. So
Okay.
about 7 minutes at about 44, 45. So nothing
Yeah.
crazy. Nice.
Do you,
Refreshing.
do you control that temperature, or is it kind of just a surprise each time you get in there?
Yeah, it's a surprise because it's just a ice barrel. So yeah, it's just wherever it's at based on the weather. So
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And have you been to the gym? You done any training yet today?
I did. I went to the gym today. I did a few Eldoas. I've been getting into the Eldoa practices a lot lately. They're pretty cool. I don't know if you've checked those out yet or not, but they're pretty neat.
No. What's it about?
It's like, I don't know, it's kind of in range motion type stuff, and it's sort of, I don't know, it's hard to describe. I'm not that into it yet. I'm trying to get more and more into it. But it's sort of like, I don't know, it's just a great way to kind of stretch things out, and there's a unique sort of nervous system response.
So, what's that type of training you're doing in the gym, mate?
The Eldoa training. It's sort of like a fascial stretching. I guess the fascia is, or the fascia, or however you say it, is sort of like saran wrap. So you can get these adhesions, and through these different postures, you sort of stretch things out, and it's unique. It's really cool. It creates a lot of space in the joints and in the spine. It's pretty nice.
I has that like how has your like before we get into it, right? But how much has your training in the gym evolved over the last 5 years?
It's evolved quite a bit.
Yeah.
I used to be, just kind of go through my normal routine, and I think the last few years with adding some things and doing more, I guess working in better. You kind of get into the Paul Check stuff a little bit, like just the concept of working in to help my working out. I think that's helped more than anything. My recovery and, just the working in process.
Yeah. So for people familiar with this, like Paul Check, obviously, well, not obviously to most people, but to Alex and I think he's like the guru of the fitness world, and he invented the Swiss ball. But a lot of the stuff that he does is really dynamic. And one thing that I take that I learned from his stuff is you wet it before you can set it. So what we mean by that is, like, you hear Callum talk about that as well, right? Who I got you onto from Corrective Culture. And talk about getting the body ready before you start pushing any weights around, essentially. And that's one thing that I reckon that I've changed in the last just probably 6 months, to be fair. Probably spending the first half an hour getting my posture where I like it, getting my mobility where I like it before I start lifting the weights and the range of motion. That's probably something that's changed in my training, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely less ego lifting and just more about just getting the self ready. But I reckon, just to kind of, one thing I've actually learned, Alex, is stretching my lats a lot has been an absolute game changer for me.
Yeah.
Do you spend a lot of time doing that too?
Yeah, that's one where with the Eldoa practices, you're doing a lot of, splaying the fingers, external rotation, and then just kind of moving the arms at different angles and trying to elongate the spine. So you start to really create space. And I agree, man, working on my lats has been huge because I can feel it going all the way down into my lower back and just creating a lot of relief, and just leveling up the pliability in my shoulder girdle has been a massive game changer for me and my golf swing for sure.
That's interesting. And when I've just found out, like, stretching my lats was I was just frustrated one day. I was on my exercise ball, I was on my foam roller, I was doing everything I could around my thoracic, trying to get relief around the thoracic and the neck region. And I dead set just at lunch one day working, just Googled it. And I saw a minute TikTok video of a guy grabbing a pole, like on a walkway, and stretching his lats out. And I
Yeah.
did it, and it just was like the most amazing experience I've ever had. And I haven't gone a day without doing it 5 times.
Yeah. And just I used to, I never really even considered how my lats were a part of my golf swing until maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and figuring out ways to level up my just everything, because it's all that that kind of middle axis of the swing, the ribs, the
Mm,
shoulder girdle, the all the muscles in the mid back, and then getting the tension kind of right in the arm lines into the shoulder girdle and the grip and all these joints kind of talking to each other well to kind of move the weight well. I've been
mhm.
enjoying it a lot.
I reckon when you talk about the lats there, right, and I think we see a lot of beautiful slow motion videos of Tiger moving from, P4 into, call it like P5.5 when he's still in his front bend, right? And you can just see his lats firing through his shirt because he's so strong, right? And when he's getting back into that front bend and he's so stable, like he looks like he's about to do, like I'm going to say, like a straight legged deadlift, if you know what I mean. Like he's
Right.
right there, ready to kind of embrace the bar, and he just looks so stable. And I look at him every time I see that. I saw a video of it this morning in ultra slow mo, and you can see the lats. You can see that it's a stable connection to help him hold that position. Don't you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. It always felt to me kind of like, when you're doing dips, kind of the feeling of like pushing down, but then lengthening the spine at the same time.
That's a
Fascinating
good. That
feels there.
is that's very fascinating. So people listening about a dip is you got both your hands just side by side on a dip bar that we use, but you might see like be familiar with like a tight walkway, and you can just go up and down. Do it at the kids' park.
Right.
Taking the kids to the park and on the little walkways, and you'll be doing that there. That's interesting because you're lengthening the spine as you're pushing down at the same time. So you're getting a really cool like extending reaction through the ball as you're throwing your arms down towards the earth. That's pretty cool. I've never thought of
Yeah.
that actually. You've got me thinking there now.
Yeah, I've always thought about it like, because I'd like to know more about just how like a martial artist would break bricks, how to get energy transferred and going in two different directions simultaneously, that kind of feeling. Because, that's something I feel when I get the pushing down and the extension and the reaction, you get it right, it jumps, you can get the club head speed
Mhm.
really there.
I tell you what, before we get into our stuff I want to talk about, my own golf game is I've neglected it like crazy, right? And to me, I was embarrassed. I had a couple of days of coaching and I was just demonstrating really poorly. And I felt like I shouldn't say to people listening, but I think if you go to a physio, you want your physio to be in good shape. If you go to the doctor, you want your doctor to be in good shape, and you want your golf pro to have a very good understanding of how to make nice contact and make good golf swing and swing it how he wants to swing it, right? And that's how I kind of feel about my golf swing. I want to take ownership of it. So I reserved time for that Saturday, and I sat down and I went to myself, what's going on? Like I was a good ball striker, I'm a good player. What's happening? And I found out that I've been doing so many slow mo demonstrations throughout the last 3 months and not really actively hitting balls with any purpose. And I thought there's something in that. I was thinking about what's been happening in my behavior the last few months to cause this. So I just went down to the range and just worked on just working hard with my pelvis and getting up and out of the ground a little bit more, and just being a little bit more active in my golf swing and just bringing back the term athletic, right? And I found it.
Mm,
I was like, oh my God, everything was just a million times better. It was actually just zinging off, and
yeah.
couldn't blame my clubs anymore. It was, it was the golf swing. But yeah, it's interesting that you talk about that energy of pushing out of the ground. I was doing a similar thing with my pelvis. But you mentioned there about a martial artist there hitting the bricks as they're pushing their hands down to the ground. Are you telling me how they break those bricks is by kind of pushing down and pulling up at the same time?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to know more. I'd like to talk to someone who can actually do it. The only martial arts I've gotten into are the internal ones. So I've never gotten into any combative martial arts. But to me, it sort of makes sense that that's sort of what's going on when you're sort of transferring energy out distally to your arms. You're kind of sending it up your
Mm.
spine and out your arms, kind of thing.
You're throwing energy down, but you're also getting up and out of there quite quickly to avoid severe injury, right? Because
Or just
you know.
absorb the force,
Mm,
through the spine. That kind of feeling of creating a lot of length in the spine. Lengthening things out, pushing down while you're simultaneously extending up. That's a big part of the golf swing. I think that, I don't know, in the last 5 or 6 years, it seems like they're trying to take the extension piece away, and I think it's a huge asset. I mean, how do you create the level of speed that some of these guys are creating without that? And even in the golf swings that I see going low left, I still see, a lot of height in the spine and the clavicle staying down as they're going around that corner. It's not, like this. Because I want the spine to be really protected through there, because that's where the weight starts to feel heavy, you know?
well, I can't even. This is just crazy. But I had the same conversation with a scratch golfer, well, an online lesson about 2 hours ago, about him struggling with the long iron because he
Right,
because he couldn't. Not only I was talking about an extension piece, but talking about getting the handle up and out of the hitting area, getting
right,
up, get the handle up. You can see him making a conscious effort with the body, but the handle stays down. You can't get up. You can't hit a long iron. so,
right,
so his
right,
dynamic lock with a 4 iron was like 9 degrees, and within one day we got up to 12. Um,
right.
and I understand what you're talking about there. But low and left, it kind of keeps the pelvis down, sternum down, but also the handle gets stuck in the ground, I reckon. Well, the club head gets stuck.
Yeah, the way I was sort of taught, some of those feels was my coach took me to the edge of the driving range, sort of behind this water pump shed, and for about 15 minutes just had me attacking the ground, attacking the ground, attacking the ground. I mean, still coming, from the inside, but basically just digging a hole in the ground with my hands and arms, trying to really keep the clavicles down, keep the
Yeah.
spine long, keep the chin tucked, keep the pubic bone lifted, keep the pelvis real level, and just bury the club in the ground. And then learn how to get it out of the ground with my, extension. Um, and that to me, I feel like gets the parametric acceleration really kind of jumping through there. Because if I can get the butt of the club feeling, really low, and I can get it, down, out, and forward, and then start pulling it up, in, and back with my, sort of extension piece, then I feel like you can really get the club head speed jumping, but you can create nice shallow compression if you can get the down and the up to sort of match as you're coming through there, out of impact.
And I think that's a really valuable lesson for most golfers as well. Is that if I've got a really cool visual that I want to share on Instagram of handle coming up, from 6, it's quite low, and it's coming up into 7. So from last parallel, shut the hands are at its lowest, and it's coming up. And I think there's a
Right,
big misconception out there. People saying need to hit down, like down. Yes, we're hitting down, but the handle's coming up.
right,
It sounds a bit
right.
confusing to people, but it's what's the handle's coming up by the time, and we're still hitting down, if that makes sense. So, um,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's that's a really big topic of discussion. I'll never forget. You hear stuff people tell you, but uh, Sean Foley did a similar thing with Lydia Ko when he took Lydia Ko when she approached him. Don't need to go in the background of the story about how she lost her game, but he put her behind a tree and just said hit a 5 iron over that tree. Just gave her a task of a week to do it. Just do it
right,
because she was stuck doing a few little funky things, right? The in here, and
right.
just looked at a golf swing and said, if you can hit 5 iron over this tree at the back of the range, I think we'll start getting you back on track. So kind of, yeah, similar thing like that. It's a lot of good old school coaches did. I even heard Tony Ruggiero talk about his first golf lesson with the guy, with a proper golf coach. And he gave him a driver and put it on the deck and said, learn to hit this in the air.
Yeah,
He gave him 100 balls and walked away.
yeah.
Yeah,
It
that,
worked.
go and find it for yourself. Learn something and learn it for yourself as well at the same time. If you have any questions, talk to me after. Because I think we're very quick to jump in and talk when we shouldn't be talking. All right. Anyways, let's get into the podcast. All right. Let's kind of keep something going on. So what I got here, right, is like I do with all my guests, and you did it fantastically, is I like asking the guest on what they want to talk about because A, there's generally a lot of passion that comes through, and B, a lot of wisdom that kind of comes with that as well. And because the person is talking about what they want to bloody talk about, right? Not what I want to suggest to talk about. So I've got some 4 topic areas here that you've kind of mentioned, and then we're going to walk through some technical talk because I think a lot of people who listen to maybe eavesdropping in on our conversation here on the podcast, right, are probably interested in a lot of the technical stuff that we kind of share.
Yeah.
And I got just my extra questions that I've kind of added to my previous podcasts of late, which have been kind of cool. All right. So you have to explain to me again, right? So subject area number 1 here, I asked you already how to say it, but I've forgotten how to say it. Can you tell me what the mental training was that you were doing?
Mental training. So
Tatha.
meditation practice or
Subject area here number 1 is Tatata golf. Tatata golf.
oh, Tata Golf. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I worked for Tata Golf after college. So when I started getting into coaching, that was kind of my first job. So I worked for that company like 2015, 2016, 2017, kind
Yep.
of around that time period, 2014, somewhere in there. It was basically a online 60-day training golf program, and it was sort of uh, designed to be, learning golf in the way you would learn a martial art. So it was a 60-day program, and the program kind of built. So you started with, some basic stuff, and then it added layers as you went through the 60-day program.
Yep.
Um, Now, I don't know if you can get people to do anything for 60 days these days, but it was it was definitely it was a unique take on just how to build a golf swing, how to build something out.
Yep. And so you got here, like you've written here, mental training and rabbit holes that you kind of experienced around that. Do you want to kind of dive down that?
Yeah, sure. Well, at that time, so I, I guess I started getting into well, I was still playing a little bit too after college. So 2012, 2013, 2014, I'm still playing. I'm still trying to compete, and I'm trying to essentially, figure out ways to level up my game in many different ways. So I started looking at, the mental side of golf, and the way my brain kind of works. Tiger Woods is Buddhist. The Buddhist guys they seem pretty calm and like they got a good head on their shoulders. So let's go see what they have to say. As far as trying to level up my mental game, I started looking at who are the best from a mental emotional perspective, and the best
Yep.
golfer of all time was raised by a Buddhist and a Green Beret. So I figured it might be good to get some formal meditation training. So I went through some training with a group um, called the Shambhala, international group. So they had some formal meditation training, and I started going through some of their levels and some of their practices, and it was an interesting experience.
And what do you think when it first? So was this completely new to you? Were you from someone that didn't come from this background, then all of a sudden would dive straight into it? Similar to my situation with my meditation practices. What was the first thing that you noticed from a competitive level as a golfer when you started down this practice?
Well, the first experience with sort of those concepts, I guess, was in college. When I was at Oregon State, our coach brought in a guy named Jerry Lynch, and Jerry had worked with, I think 30 national championship teams, and he'd written a great
Wow.
book about, the art of war and sort of Sun Tzu's, perspective and kind of this Eastern, Taoist type vibe. And that was kind of my first um, experience with just kind of sitting and breathing, and when a thought comes in, you know label it, thinking, and let it go, kind of thing, touch and go
Mhm.
type approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so those experiences definitely helped me because I was very good at breaking golf clubs before that, and it started
Same.
me a little bit more aware of where I'm at emotionally on the golf course. So
And I think what Alex is showing with there, right, to kind of continue along that trend with, he said something there, right, which has got a lot of importance to it about how you mentioned you acknowledge the thought and then let it go, or just take that thought for what it is. And I think a lot of us, a lot of the time, right, is we can treat our thinking and take it too personally. Now, what I mean by that, right, is that I always go by the notion like first thought is wrong. Back in the day, right? First thought is wrong, right? Now, hopefully, it's not as wrong. But if you're on the golf course and you're trying to help control your thinking a little bit, right? Or you're working through some emotions, if you think, oh, if I don't want to hit the water over there, that's a bad thing. It's okay to think that. Just accept that you've thought that there's water over there, but just let it go. You know what I mean? It's normal for a person to be in that experience to look for the fearful places to be. So I have got absolutely no mental psych training in golf at all, but I just know that from my normal practices, it's completely normal to have those crazy thoughts. It's just accept it and keep moving on. Don't you reckon?
yeah, I always struggled with that sort of idea of like, building walls or trying to block out, what's out there, because what's out there
Yeah.
is designed to challenge you on purpose, So you're either up for the challenge or you're not. And to block it out is to lie. And it actually gives it more fuel than
Yeah.
you're trying to block something out. The water's not there. Don't see the water. Don't see the hazard. Don't see the out of bounds, that kind of stuff. It's interesting too with the word usage that golf sort of provides. It's like very World War One verbiage, like hazards and bunkers and boundary fences, and it's all kind of designed to kind of create a
I've
fear
never thought of that.
response. But seeing that as a challenge that you're up for versus something that you're afraid of, I think is a little different perspective that really helped me. And to your point,
Yeah.
whether it's the best thought in the world or the worst thought in the world, it's a thought. There's zero
Mm.
intrinsic value. It's just a
Yeah.
thought. So
Yeah.
you don't have to cling to the thought, and I think when you cling to it and start to habituate it, then it might become more of an issue.
That's so true. And like you said there about that tunnel vision, right? And people try to put things to the side. It's so completely normal for you if you're driving your car, right? You're constantly looking at the side of the road, right? Like, is someone walking out? Or in Australia, is there a kangaroo? Or, is what's happening around you? You're looking for dangers, especially when you protect your family. You're constantly looking, right? So you can't just focus on the road. You've actually got to be looking for these things and just kind of work your way through it. So it's completely normal when you get to the golf course to acknowledge these situations on the course. It's just try not to, I think you use the term habituate there, but potentially don't obsess over it, accept it, move on. And like, I love that term, be up for the challenge. You know what I mean? And trust your practice is a good one, right? Like, trust the work you've done to not go near there. But if you start pushing something to the side, you're not accepting it's there and you're becoming scared of it. Where if you acknowledge the fact that it's there, then you can move through it, right?
Well, and sometimes too, I feel, when you see the water on the left and you decide to, aim at it and cut one off of it, that starts to raise your energy up a little bit, so you walk into the golf ball a little differently. And there's a little bit more like, all right, boys, bring it, let's go.
Yeah.
So from a pre-shot energy perspective, from a pre-shot sort of inner dialogue perspective, within your pre-shot routine, those are things that I'm, having my students train,
Yeah.
because at the elite level, the words matter, and and if you can choose the words and come up with sort of like a mantra or some sort of thing that you know allows you to collect your thoughts, I guess.
Yeah.
That's very, very beneficial. One thing I used to say to myself walking into the golf ball was, for whatever reason, this shot might be really, really good. It might
Yeah.
be. It might not be, but it might
Yeah.
be. All I'm trying to do is create openness to something new happening out in front. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to be the one having to control everything necessarily, but if I get myself in the right resonance as I'm walking in and I sense something great might happen, then something great might happen. And for me to
Yeah.
shoot lower than I've ever shot before, I can't rely on the past because the past limits me to what I know. So for me to do something
Mm.
that I've never done, I have to be open to something new out in front. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't necessarily get into like the now. I think that like, cause there's the now and then there's the big now. So it's like, I feel like if you're in the moment, you're in the past a little bit, it's all unfolding kind of sequentially out in front. So I'm present to where I'm at and I'm aware of where I'm at, but I'm constantly sensing where I'm going. And I'm wanting that energy of where I'm going to kind of pull me toward it. Um,
That's interesting. Can you
yeah.
can you give me an example of some negative talk to a person going into a golf ball on a pre-shot routine, and maybe what you would do to turn that into a positive?
Just shift the words. Just
Yeah.
be more specific with the words that you're saying to yourself. So, I think of, well, because my son's 16 months, so I have a lot of these kind of thoughts go through my head about what's he thinking about, you know what's he where's his head at, because he hasn't really learned language yet, he hasn't really eaten from the tree of knowledge yet, so
Yeah.
he's kind of aware and happy. uh,
Yeah.
so trying to find that place of a satori type experience or childlike play where you're out of your head, and then how do you do that? Well, there's practices for that, and it's
Yeah.
challenging too, I think, from a Western perspective, because there's a lot of emphasis on, I think, therefore I am,
Yes.
versus
Yes. Yes.
like I am and there is thinking. So I think that's a little different perspective. And as I got into the Eastern stuff, it was interesting to hear a different perspective, because I grew up in, America in the 1990s. So
Yeah.
that was my
Oh,
training.
well,
So
the same. So what you're talking about there, right? When you say the thinking is, you are not your thoughts. That's what I should say to people. You are not your thoughts, right? But you can acknowledge a thought that comes in, accept it for what it is, and then just move on from that thought. I think the average human has so many thousand thoughts a day or whatever, right? But when you talk about there about trying to not get too much in your head and thinking about moving forward, I like that kind of position you're in there. You're in a sense of strength as well. I like it. And looking forward and looking outward and not getting stuck in the thoughts and so much in that present now that you talk about, which is potentially just past pretty quickly, right? That becomes a practice though, because you come in and out all the time, right? Do you have like a certain sense of awareness or a mantra that brings yourself out of it, or what do you do in your golf? Like, how do you approach each shot?
so I would create triggers, so sort of like mnemonic devices.
Yeah.
So whenever I would adjust my hat or lift my sleeve or
Mm,
tap my ring finger, then the words would show up. So I train
I like that.
myself like you would with, Pavlov and his dogs. Whenever you ring a bell, you give the dog a treat, you ring a bell, you give the dog a treat, you ring the bell, you give a dog a treat. Two
Yeah.
weeks later, you ring the bell and the dog starts to salivate. So you create these sort of triggers, and then
Yeah.
when I adjust my hat, for whatever reason, this next golf shot might be better than it's ever been. But that's a
It's
training and
interesting.
that's a practice that, over time you work on.
Yeah, and I think it's a really useful tool there about developing your own kind of mantra that you've got. I've got mine. It's just some words from Krishna Das, who's part of the Be Here Now network, one of his major songs, and doesn't quite necessarily mean too much, but what it does is it acts as kind of a bit of a trigger to me, and helps me get out because it's part of his mantra songs. But um, you know what? And for people to even, it doesn't need to be a spiritual type of saying. I went through a period there, right, where I was too over concerned, and my little mantra was, "It's not that fucking important." So, like, if I'm mulling over something in my head, and it does too much head miles, I'd go, "It's not that fucking important," and it would just help me let it go
Right.
and snap it away.
Right.
And you know, when you come into some certain circumstances in your life, you really find out what's important and what's not important. And unfortunately, it generally takes a death within the family to, or you know, a near death experience to kind of witness that. And I think a lot of the time, us, especially in the West, we get caught up in what we think's important, and it's definitely not important. And if I catch up with my friends who live in India, and I'll talk to them, they don't give a fuck about the podcast or how many lessons I'm doing, or you know, the new car I bought or the house I'm living in. They just literally do not even care. But if I go to conversations with my friends here, um, that stuff's celebrated. You know what I mean? So it is definitely different, right? But anyways, what I'm getting at there is that that's a neat little easy mantra. Do you have some other stuff that people can throw around in their head a little bit, to apart from being a external physical thing?
Well, I guess the practice is just to sort of have a touch and go approach. And in my training with the Shambhala group, like the first level was a lot of just sitting and learning to sit and breathe. And the object of the meditation at that point is the breath. So you kind of, you're put into this room and there's a bunch of people there all on cushions and you're all sitting together and they ring the bell and you sit and
Yeah,
there's a lot of it was very physical. There's a lot of
it's
posture
hard.
matters.
Yeah,
It's really physical. I don't. It seems mental, but I think it's mostly physical because when you're sitting with if you're trying to sit in a full lotus, I mean, good luck.
yep.
That's a physical practice. So you see these
Mhm.
old monks sitting in lotus, and it's pretty impressive if you think about uh, maybe what it's like seeing older folks in different parts of the world. So
Yeah,
with the breathing, you're coming back to the breath when you're sitting, but then in between sits, you're walking. So they had us sit for 20 minutes, walk for 10 minutes, sit for 20 minutes, walk for 10 minutes, sit for 20 minutes. And you'd have these like 3-4 hour stretches of
mm,
just silence and practice. And
yeah,
it's like being in solitary confinement. And, some people would leave the room and cry and have all
yeah.
kinds things come up, thoughts come up, things that you've been
Mm,
suppressing bubble up. Um,
mate,
and I
I've
just
yeah,
fascinating that it wasn't very easy. You think you can tame this thing. Up in here, you got these thoughts that like to kind of run on a loop, and then um, you're basically just taking a touch and go approach, having them, if the thoughts come in, label it thinking, go back to the breath. And after a while, you just kind of get to where you're overthinking. You're done. There's nothing to think about. Just be here now kind of thing.
mate.
With the
We
walking meditation was fascinating that instead
yeah,
of the breath, you come back to how the foot is touching the ground. So
yeah.
I thought that was interesting from a golfer's perspective because you're out there walking the golf course, and whenever the mind wanders off, as it will, you just kind of bring it back to how your foot is interacting with the ground, your posture, your breathing, those kinds of things. Um, just interesting practices.
It's interesting when you talk about there, right? In the West, particularly, we live in the world of distraction, right? And everyone wants your attention, and we've got these things in our pockets that distract us 24/7. And it's, you try and sit with yourself. You know, I've done a few retreats, North India, here in Australia, and in Indonesia, and you try to do a silent retreat, and it can cause some serious stuff can come up. It can be really heavy, but and then you talk about sitting there, right? People say sitting. You say these monks sitting in a lotus position, which having like their feet tucked in. But if you even sit on the ground and you try to stay there for like 20 minutes, it is difficult, man. The first time I went to some retreats, I spent most of the majority thinking about how much my spine was hurting.
Yeah, I found it interesting too, because as I trained more, I got around some of the more seasoned practitioners, that have been practicing since the '60s and '70s.
Yeah.
When that group came over to America, they started practicing back then, and you see those people. They're just their posture is immaculate when you're around
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They're always very regal looking,
Yeah.
king like, but not in an arrogant way, in a very
Hmm.
just kind of right way.
Okay.
And it's interesting to be around someone who's spent a lot of time sitting, you know. And there's also this cool kind of like, you know, do you have calluses on your butt cheeks yet or not, kind of thing, like show me
Interesting.
you put some time in, and you can kind of prove how much time you put in by your form. So
Yeah. Well, and they're not looking down at a phone, they're not looking at a phone. But to bring that back to some golf stuff there, right? In regards to some stuff that I kind of has come up to me when we are talking there is if you're on the golf course and you're worried about your thinking a little bit and you're looking for that trigger to try and help bring you back. Alex mentioned the breath there. I love the sensation of like just breathing the cold air through my nose and then breathing the hot air out through my mouth. And then kind of going that way. And that'll bring me back. That'll loosen my jaw and that'll bring me straight back. But you mentioned the feet one there, I think is fantastic. Is acknowledging the fact that you're walking. And then, friends of mine talk about eating. They talk about how good can I eat this food? You know what I mean? So for you, it's like, how good can I walk to my golf ball here? And all of a sudden you're just focused on walking and not thinking about, um, you know, the nasty thoughts. And I tell you who's got some strength in that area must be Nick Dunlap, because man, what that guy just did, wasn't that amazing? Winning a PGA
yeah,
Tour event as an amateur.
the maturity level, listening to him talk, is pretty impressive at the age of 20. It's yeah, he's very well trained.
Mind-boggling stuff. I asked Stephen Giuliano on the podcast. I said, what was more impressive, the physical aspect of winning the event or the mental side? And he said mental before I even finished.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time an amateur won on the tour?
20, 27 years ago, Mr. Phil Mickelson, and he proved to be a pretty much bit of a baller, right?
He did all right.
He wasn't a flash in the pan. All right,
Yeah,
talk to me a little bit there. You mentioned about Trungay Rip. I can't say his name. Trungay Rinpoche. Trungay
yeah,
Rinpoche.
Chogyam Trungpa. Yeah,
Yeah. So I hear a lot of him come up in I listen to the Be Here Now network with obviously started by Ram Dass and now run by Raghu Marcus and Krishna Das and the crew there and Sharon Holsberg. Tell me what did you learn from his practices?
well, that was the group that I trained with. So the Shambhala International group, so he essentially, like a lot of the Tibetans, fled Tibet when China came in and started
Yeah.
messing things up. So
Yes.
they went into exile in India, as you know the story. And
Yeah.
Chogyam Trungpa was, a guy who basically set up Buddhism in the West, or was one of the, first guys to sort of bring Buddhism to the West. So he started sprouting up, meditation centers all over the West. And then he came to America, set up the Naropa Institute. This is kind of late '60s, early '70s. Ram Dass is there in these scenes at that time. Formerly, known as Richard Alpert, a Harvard psychologist who, went to India and, met a Hindu saint and kind of changed his life. And they were kind of him and Timothy Leary, obviously with the whole psychedelic, movement in that
Yep.
time period. Real cool stories coming out of that era. And
Mm.
yeah, so the training that I went through was with the Shambhala International Group, and it was just it was formal meditation training.
And how long did that go for?
Well, a few years. It's still going. There's levels that you can
Yeah.
kind of progress through. So it's kind of cool the way they set it up. There's the retreat practice aspect, and then there's kind of the book work, and you're kind
Yeah.
of learning simultaneously as you go. So there was 5 levels that I had to get through to get to a certain point. Like at first, level 1, level 2, you're kind of learning, how to meditate. Level 1 is really the fundamentals, and then level 2, the gaze started to shift. So when you're sitting, the gaze went more down. So it
Yeah.
was more like introspective type meditation. Um, so you're kind of working through your stuff, and then level 3, level 4, level 5, you start to build your confidence and then kind of go out into the world with it sort of idea. And then so you have like these 5-week courses that kind of correspond with the weekend retreats.
Yeah.
And then past that, there was another level that I went to, and then there was what's called the Enlightened Society Assembly, which was a 9-day meditation retreat in the Colorado mountains at the Shambhala Center in Colorado. I stayed in a tent for 9 days and sat and walked and sat and walked, and
Yeah.
it was pretty cool up in the mountains, kind of away from everything.
Yep.
It was a unique experience because after 9 days of sitting, um, things get pretty relaxed and pretty
Yeah.
quiet, and things slow down. Time feels like it really slows down, and then I remember going back to the Denver airport and just feeling like, whoa,
Yeah.
like everything's coming at me really fast, everything's
Mm.
just, everyone's in a hurry, and it was cool. It was a cool experience.
It definitely becomes, when you come out of the experiences, becomes everything becomes really overwhelming, like a sensory overload. Everything becomes
Right,
really big because you've slowed down that much. And
right,
if that's even just a great example of people listening about how the importance of your environment and what it plays on how you are as a human, because and as a golfer and whatever you want to be, because Alex shared an experience there about, you're talking then about being fucking so super level, and then you come out of it and all of a sudden you're in this sensory overload because you're in that environment only for 9 days too. It doesn't take a whole lot to shift, right? To shift. Um, so what daily meditation practices, or what does your kind of daily stuff look like? Is what works for you, and what do you put into your routine?
I like uh I like going into my body and doing, yoga type stuff, and, exercises, and working in type stuff, breath work. As far as like meditation practice goes, one practice that I really like is called Tong Len. So with Tong Len, you're breathing in sort of negativity, bad energy,
Yeah.
uh, suffering, trying to take on that, and then you're breathing out sort of the antidote, so sort of trying to breathe out loving kindness and compassion. So it's kind of a practice in, you know, give it to me, I'll take the suffering, and I'll give you back love, kind of thing. So Tong Len's one of my, I guess, favorite practices. If I'm going to sit for 20 minutes and practice, that would be one that I really like to do. But in my experience with the mind training stuff, over time, it all kind of starts to blend together. It's like, I don't know if I really, I mean, there's times where I feel like I need to sit down and breathe, things start to feel overwhelming. But usually with those practices, as you do them more and more, you can just bring your awareness back to your breath, or bring it back to your feet, or bring it back to your posture, or, put your brain wherever you want to put it. Just
Yeah.
kind of settle in. So interesting for golf too, because, in golf, when you're working on your golf game and working on new feels and new experiences with your golf swing, like I'll say things like, put your brain in your right elbow or put your brain in your right shoulder, and just,
Totally.
getting embodied. I like those sort of practices where it's like, instead of being in my head, I'll start to try to go into my heart, or move from that place versus always from, being up here.
Dropping into the heart instead of being stuck in the head. It's what do they say? It's the longest place is from the head to the heart, right? It's a good place to live. And I think if people, in my experience, Alex, when I talk about that, is like, before you open your mouth, is this coming from the heart or is this coming from the head? I think that's a really kind of good way of looking at it. But in my experience with my meditation practices, right, Alex, it's definitely not where it used to be prior to kids, obviously, right? Not having the time like I used to, but it's definitely shifted as my life has become more busy. I reckon I'm doing more um, mantra stuff, mantra and like a bit of kirtan. So it might be where Krishna Das talks, like says something and I say something back, like Om Namah Shivaya, and I might say Om Namah Shivaya back. So I kind of I can stay keeping my thinking on what's coming up instead of just trying to be aligned in one way. When I'm really well, I can do meditation and not think so much about and kind of keep fighting off the thoughts. But when I'm super busy, some simple like guided meditation or some kirtan for me is great because it's an active doing something and it kind of keeps my mind on a task, not deathly quiet. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at with my practice at this point in time. Tell me about your before we get into some golf technical stuff, right? Tell me about your sun gazing, fasting, earthing, detoxifying. Can you share with me some of these things? Because I do them all. But
Oh, really?
yeah. Well, I don't sun gaze as well, but I'll go make sure like if I'm working in here, I'll go have my lunch outside or I'll go have my coffee outside as much as I can, right? And I
Yeah.
don't wear shoes. I don't wear shoes 24/7, right? I'm in barefoot. To my kids barefoot, training barefoot in the gym. The trainers looking at me. I'm waiting for one of them to tell me this morning to take my shoes off, put my shoes on. I pack them in my bag. I don't put them on until someone tells me to. But yeah, can you tell me about the importance of some of these practices like sun gazing, fasting, earthing?
Oh man. So I guess this was right around 2013, 2014, 2015, somewhere in that time span. Kind of, I was doing all of this stuff sort of simultaneously. I'm getting into, some Buddhist practices. I'm reading a lot of the, Christian mystic type stuff. I'm fascinated in the Hindu stuff. And um, there was a guy named, I watched a documentary. There's a guy named Hira Ratan Manik who, there was a documentary called Eat the Sun.
Yeah,
And I watched it and I thought it was fascinating. And he basically had a training where, it was a 9-month training, and you start day one at sunrise, and you're just watching the sunrise for 10 seconds. So you're
yeah,
staring right at the sun for 10 seconds.
yeah,
Um, Apparently, like at certain times of the day, the UV light's different, so you wouldn't stare at the sun at noon.
no,
But in the first 40 minutes of the day and the last sort of 40, I guess it's 44 minutes, but the first 44 minutes and the last 44 minutes of the day, the UV light's a little different. So you can take that in. And I think now if you watch like the Huberman Lab podcast, and there's a lot
yeah,
more research on, the benefits of, getting real light into your eyes, and the circadian rhythm and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Um, but the training basically just started with 10 seconds day one, and then day two, 20 seconds, and then day three, 30 seconds, and then day four, 40 seconds. And
Mm.
it went on for until you get to 44 minutes.
That's a long
So
time. 44 minutes. That's a very
yeah,
long time.
yeah.
That's a
And it took about 9 months or so. I think 9 or 10 months, there, because I was living in Arizona at the time. So I had a perfect opportunity, right before work, just go, catch the sun and then go to the golf course kind of thing. So I was up with the sunrise for about a year, and some pretty unique experiences there from I don't know, pineal gland perspective, like kind of
Yeah.
uncalcifying my third eye, I think maybe a little
Yeah.
bit. I'm not sure what happened, but it was a really cool experience. And my appetite, I, it was a crazy experience in energy and not needing to eat that much. Uh, and
Yeah.
the I guess NASA studied this guy Hiro Ratamanik, and he went very long stretches without eating and
Yeah.
under guided study. There's guys that can do things that maybe our culture wouldn't believe. And
Yeah.
some pretty credible things.
It's crazy stuff out there. Oh, you've seen the guy that started RA Optics. I use the blue light glasses, and I have the red light glasses at night that block out both the lights. Um, it's important for me working at the screen a whole time. The only light I want to take in is from the sun, right? Not from the screens. But tell me, that's fascinating. That's some serious discipline that you got there too, around about that sun gazing for 9 months. Can you tell me about fasting? How do you incorporate that?
Well, at that time, I was just, it was kind of a just learning, just a lot of learning, a lot of figuring things out, and I think we've all figured some things out over the last 5 or 6 years, especially. But from a health perspective, I was always, because as you get into the meditation world, in my experience, you have better sits and worse sits, and you start to realize that as the body, you know, starts to feel a little better, then the sits start to get a little bit better. So fasting, um, with the sun gazing, the longest fast I ever did was like 4 days.
It's pretty good.
But just a really unique energy, because I'm not digesting anything. So, from a detoxification perspective, from a just resetting the system perspective, and then sitting and breathing and doing these practices, um, very, very helpful, very kind of empty your cup so you can fill it back up kind of thing.
Well, mate, we just got to look. We only got to look at how we used to live before grocery stores, and it was the hunters and gatherers, right? So they only ate when the food come in. So they were very good at fasting. It was just normal part of life. Um,
Right.
I think now we just eat way too much.
Yeah.
I actually just did a cleanse myself, which was a parasite cleanse, which was no sugar, no caffeine, no below ground vegetables, um, no carbohydrate, obviously. So it's basically just kind of getting rid of all the parasites out of your body, right? Which I did. I go into too much detail past quite a few, um, and detoxifying. And since coming back from that, I'm only eating once a day.
Yeah.
So, like yesterday and today, definitely only one meal each. Today, I've just had at lunch, I had grass fed steak and banana and an egg. Had that yesterday, and I had it today for lunch. And my wife asked me asked me tonight if I want dinner again. I was like, no, probably not. Don't want to. Um, so I went to the gym this morning and just ate meat after it. So yeah, no, I agree with you there. And you're kind of detoxifying at the same time when you're doing the fasting, right? Because you're shedding everything out.
Yeah, and just creating a different relationship to food because as you're getting into with me as I was getting more into the practices of letting some thoughts go and working through some things and getting my body to feel better, um, starting to create a different relationship with food, having more gratitude for my inner world,
Yeah.
you know um, just starting to, because when you're young, 20, 18, 19, 20, you don't, I don't know, I guess I wasn't trained to really look at what's going on the inside. And then you come to find out that, the more you research this stuff, there's a kind of a correlation between, what's going on in our gut and what's going on in our head. And in my experience, as I got cleaner with my diet, my thoughts were nicer. so, so it was
Oh,
kind of cool.
mate,
They didn't come at me as aggressively, I guess.
if I could share something on with that as well, dude, is like I have we just had a horrible stomach bug come through the household that my youngest picked up from daycare. He just started vomiting on Saturday, and I just thought he must have eaten something he shouldn't have because he just loves floor food. Right? He just picks up and just puts anything in his mouth. And soon I found out Monday night it was not. It was a stomach bug, right? And my wife and I both found out. We went through some horrible situations for the next 48 hours. But my thinking yesterday was the worst it's been in so long. And I said to my wife, I'm really not feeling well up top, like a bit anxious, a few things are going on. She's like, what's happening? I was like, I said, the only thing I can put it down to is that rotten stomach bug we had and kind of the biology within my gut there is doing something with my stinking thinking, and so I had to kind of just wait it out really. And I feel pretty good today. Feel pretty good, but the guts are still a little bit crampy, but there's definitely a huge relationship between them two, isn't it? It's crazy. But let's get into the next topic here before we dive into some golf nerd stuff, right? We're going to break this up into 2 episodes. Um, your NLP, your neuro linguistic programming. Now, what I'm excited about this that you mentioned that you saw 4 tour players using this technique recently. Can you explain
Well,
to us what NLP is?
yeah. So this was when I was at Tathata Golf.
Yeah,
Some tour players would kind of come through and pick up some tips, I guess, some mental tips. And
yeah,
uh, so the NLP stuff was interesting because, well, so basically, Richard Bandler, I guess it's his work, neurolinguistic programming,
yeah.
basically how we, assimilate words into, you know, thoughts and emotions and that kind of stuff. And um, so what I experienced was it was sort of you got laid down in a zero gravity chair. Um, they would kind of walk you back from 7 to 1 and kind of get you into this kind of almost like hypnotic type state. There's even at the more advanced guys that would have certain like theta waves going and certain lights and things like that to kind of get you into this really sort of subconscious state, and then from there put your words that you want into you sort of thing. So if you're struggling with I can't get over my Oreo addiction or something like that, you could kind of reprogram those thoughts,
Interesting.
um, and choose the thoughts that you want, rather than the thoughts that you've decided to habituate or the thoughts that you might have taken on from someone else that aren't even yours. Um, so I thought that was a unique experience. And I saw a few tour players come in and, because players at that level, they're so good. It's just like shift the thinking a little bit and
Mm,
you win,
mm.
and I saw, 4 guys come in and do some training and shift some thoughts and have a lot of success in a really short period of time, because at that level, everyone's so talented. If you really believe in yourself, then cool things can happen out there. So it was a fascinating experience. I'm not an expert. I don't. All I know is my experience, and it's sort of like you take in things from a mental diet perspective. So
Yeah.
um,
And when you say there shift the thinking, I'm assuming as well you're probably shifting the emotional attachment to that thinking, right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
like we're talking before about acknowledging the fact of that thought being there, but shifting the emotional reaction to that thought. So, like if people we refer back to what we are talking about before about being concerned about the World War One terms, which you've just enlightened me on, hazards and bunkers, boundary fences, right? And shifting the emotional attachment to those thoughts and not being a negative connotation. I think one of the greatest examples of that I got explained to at a very, very young age by a sports psychologist was he said, Toby, I want you to imagine you're drinking a cup. So we hold the cup up and he goes, it's got your beautiful, most favorite soft drink in there. What does it taste like? We're all going, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It's all right now. And I want you to pick that cup up and I want you to think about, he goes, just start drinking that it's full of your urine. And I goes, yuck, rah, 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 yuck. Start spitting it out. And I haven't thought about that for a long time, but that is about shifting your thinking, right? We're just imagining, and everyone's making all these connotations like, oh my God, that's so disgusting. But it's just a thought. You know what I mean? It's just a thought. And that's an interesting way of kind of thinking about it, right?
Yeah, and like certain things, because guys would have issues. Like we all have like yippy things, in golf.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I might flub this chip, or I might three putt, or that little thought that starts to kind of creep in at the wrong time.
Mm,
And I've seen tour players, train to where when you feel that thought coming on, it's your best friend showing up to remind you of who you're not.
interesting.
Rather than that thought being something to be afraid of or to hide from that thought or try to block that thought out, that thought is your best friend, because that thought is here to remind you of who you are and where you're going. So if you can kind of shift it to where you know it's a benefactor, rather than a detriment, then yeah, the yip won't show up.
It's interesting as well because you can also use it in my practices with prayer as well. It's about if you don't react to that thought, then you can just acknowledge it and then you can pray, well, drop into your heart, whatever you want to call it, right? And then find the real answer. But if you react on that thought and think about it, but you need to take that split second to acknowledge the thought and then drop into your heart to come up with the right answer, then to make the right action.
Right.
I hope that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and like with big time decisions in life, like making sure that you're in the right resonance when you make a decision, So like
Mm,
there were a few tour players that, you know, would sort of struggle with putting, you know.
mhm,
So for whatever reason, I'm going to lose my putter, and when I lose my putter, I'm off the tour, So that's the anxiety is,
mm,
I'm if soon as if my putting goes, I'm gone. Someone's going to take my job. So the way, with being on the tour, you've got all these gurus out there on the tour. You've got all these different club manufacturers. You got all these opportunities to change things.
yeah.
You can get a new putter. You can get a new putting coach. You can try all these different techniques. And one thing that I thought was fascinating was getting guys to make decisions when they're in the right place. So like don't make a decision when you just three putted the 18th hole and you missed the cut by one. That's not the time to make a decision about your putting. How about you go clean your car, get it all washed up and detailed? How about you buy your wife some flowers? How about you buy your kid a gift? Do something really good for somebody else. And then when you're in that place, go sit down for 10 minutes and think about where you need to go with your putting, you know? So don't make those kind of rash decisions on the fly. Make sure that you make important decisions when you're in the right resonance. So, like you said, going into your heart and hearing what your heart has to say, because we've all had those experiences on the golf course where it's like, okay, is this my head or is this my heart? And who should I listen to right now? And,
Mm.
um,
I like that advice though about not acting too quickly, and um, what you're doing there as well at the same time is you're taking out the emotional and you're allowing that person to drop back into a level situation, so they're not in that kind of too heightened when it's not a good time to make a decision at all.